The night my daughter and her husband told me to move out of my own house, something inside me went quiet. They said it was just temporary, but I could see in their eyes they had already moved on without me. That same week, I watched strangers walk through my living room, pointing, measuring, planning a renovation for a house that still smelled like my husband's workshop. My daughter didn't say a word. Her husband handled everything. I wasn't angry, not yet. I just started writing things down, dates, names, signatures, because when people you love erase you, sometimes the only way to stay alive is to remember. And that's how it began, the night I turned the light on and refused to be invisible again. My name is Margaret Lowell, but everyone used to call me Maggie. I'm 63. I've lived in this house most of my life. My husband built it after we got married. We didn't have much back then, but we had each other, and that was enough. He passed away almost 10 years ago. Since then, it's just been me. I still do small woodworking jobs for people in town. Fix a chair, repair a table, little things like that. It keeps me busy and it helps me pay the bills. People think when you live alone, you get used to it. You don't. You just stop talking to the walls after a while. My daughter Anna moved out years ago. She has her own life now, married to a man named Thomas. He's the kind of person who talks more than he listens. Always has a plan, always knows better than everyone else. I tried to like him, I really did, for Anna's sake. But something about him never sat right with me. He looks at everything like he's trying to figure out how much it's worth. The first time he came to our home, he didn't ask about the memories here or about Ben, my husband. He just said, "Well, this property could go for a lot, Maggie. You've got good land." I remember smiling politely. That's what women my age do. We smile when something feels wrong. Anna used to come visit once a week, then once a month. Now it's mostly phone calls, quick ones, usually when they need something. "Mom, can you watch the house while we're gone?" "Mom, do you still have that old toolbox?" It's never, "How are you doing, Mom?" A few months ago, Thomas called. He said there was a small investment opportunity, something temporary. He explained that if I let them use the house title for a few months, it would help them get a business loan. He said it was just paperwork, that my name would stay on everything, that it was just a formality. Anna was there too, nodding, telling me how much it would help them start a new chapter. I didn't really understand all the details, but I didn't want to be the mother who holds her children back. I wanted to believe that they were including me, that they trusted me. So I signed. I didn't ask a lawyer, didn't read the fine print. I just trusted my own daughter. When they left, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table looking at that paper. It didn't feel like anything important. Just another signature among many I've written in my life. Permission slips, bills, receipts. But if I'd known what that paper would do to me later, I would have burned it right there. The days after that were quiet. Too quiet. I tried to call Anna, but she was always busy. "We'll come by soon," she said. When they finally showed up, Thomas was already talking about renovations. He said it would increase the property value. He talked like I wasn't even in the room. He pointed at the walls, mentioned tearing things down, painting, changing the flooring. Every time he said the house, I wanted to say, my house, but I didn't. I just stood there nodding, like a guest watching someone else's plans. Later that week, he came back with a few men. They walked around, measuring, taking pictures. He said it was for an appraisal. Standard procedure, he called it. Anna just smiled at me, said everything was fine. But I could see it. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to meet my eyes. Something inside me started to feel heavy. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't have proof. Still, I tried to trust them. You tell yourself that your children would never hurt you, not on purpose. But you also know when something has changed. The way they talk to you, the way they avoid small things, the way your name disappears from their sentences, that's when you start to understand that love can fade quietly. One night, I got a call from Anna. She said, "Mom, we might need you to move into the back room for a few weeks while we do some remodeling." I said, "You mean the storage room?" She laughed like it was nothing. "It's just for a bit. You'll be more comfortable there than with all the noise." I didn't argue. I said, "Okay." When I hung up, I just sat there for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. It was more like something inside me just stopped moving. I realized they were slowly pushing me out of my own home, not with words, but with decisions. That night, I took out my old notebook. I wrote down the date I signed the papers. Then I wrote down everything that had happened since. Who came, what was said, what was taken away. I didn't know what I would do with it, but writing it down made me feel like I still had some control. Before going to bed, I looked around the room, not to admire it, but to remember where everything belonged. I didn't know how long I'd still get to live there. For the first time, the place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt borrowed. People think betrayal always comes with shouting or fighting. It doesn't. Sometimes it comes with a polite smile and a few signatures. And before you even notice, you've been erased from your own life. That night, I decided one thing. I would not let them erase me completely. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I wasn't done. Papers are just papers, I thought. But sometimes one signature can turn a mother into a stranger in her own home. Dinner used to mean something in this house. When Ben was still here, we'd sit together, even if it was just soup and bread, and talk about our day. We didn't have much, but it felt warm, familiar, ours. Now, when Anna and Thomas come over, it feels more like a business meeting than a meal. The last time they visited, Thomas walked in first, already talking about some deal before he even said hello. He gave me a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes, kissed Anna on the cheek, and took his seat at the table like he had somewhere better to be. I had spent the afternoon cooking, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted it to feel like family again. I made the stew Anna used to love when she was little. Back then, she would sit beside me while I cooked, talking about school, about her friends, dipping pieces of bread into the pot before dinner was even ready. She used to tell me my food tasted like home. Now she just stared at her phone between bites, nodding at whatever Thomas was saying. Thomas talked about interest rates, investments, and renovations. He spoke fast, the way people do when they like hearing themselves. I didn't understand half of it, but I nodded when it felt right, just to keep the peace. He started talking about the kitchen, saying how it could be opened up to make more space, maybe put in something modern to raise the property value. He didn't ask me what I thought. He didn't even realize the table we were eating on was the one Ben built by hand when we first moved in. To Thomas, it was just old wood taking up space. Anna finally looked up from her phone and said, "You don't have to worry, Mom. Thomas handles everything now." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that comes when you want to change the subject, not share a moment. I smiled back, but inside it felt like something closed off. I realized then that the space between us wasn't just about distance. It was like we were speaking different languages, living in different worlds. After dinner, Thomas stepped outside to take a phone call. Anna stayed at the table with me. I tried to start a real conversation, asked if she was tired, if she was happy. She said she was fine, just busy. That's all she ever says lately. "I'm fine, Mom." I could see she was distracted, her fingers playing with the edge of her napkin, her eyes glancing toward the door every few seconds. When Thomas came back, he said they had to leave soon. Anna thanked me for dinner, kissed me on the cheek, and they were gone. It all happened so quickly that I didn't even get to tell her goodbye properly. After they left, the house felt heavier than usual. I cleared the dishes slowly, not because there were many, but because I didn't know what to do next. I looked at the leftovers on the table, the half-eaten bread, the stew that nobody really touched, and I thought about how many times I had done this exact thing, cooked too much, hoped for something more, ended up with silence. I packed the food into containers and put them in the fridge, even though I knew no one would eat them. That's just what you do when you're used to waiting. As I wiped the table, I started remembering the dinners from when Anna was young. Back then, she would tell me about the boy she liked at school, or how she wanted to grow up and build a house near the water like ours. She used to promise that she would never move far away, that she'd always come back. I never told her that one day she might forget those promises, maybe because I didn't want to believe it myself. The next week she called again. Her voice was polite but distant. She said they might come by to talk about a few updates on the house. I didn't ask what that meant. I just said, okay. When they arrived, Thomas had more papers in his hands. He talked about refinancing and new loans, things that didn't make sense to me. I tried to follow along, but every time I asked a question, he would talk faster, as if I was interrupting something important. He said it was all temporary, just a few signatures to help them qualify for something better. Anna didn't say much, just kept nodding and looking at him. At one point, I asked what it meant for me. Thomas smiled like he was talking to a child and said, "Nothing changes for you, Maggie. Everything stays the same." For a moment, I wanted to believe him, but I could see the truth in Anna's face. She couldn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on her hands, and she kept turning her wedding ring around her finger, the way people do when they're nervous or guilty. That small movement told me everything I needed to know. Something had already changed and they just hadn't told me yet. That night, I couldn't eat. I made a cup of tea and sat at the same table where we'd had dinner, staring at the empty chairs. I thought about all the years I'd spent there, waiting for Ben to come home from work, helping Anna with homework, laughing at things that didn't matter but somehow meant everything. Now the table felt like a stranger. It held memories, but not warmth. I thought about what Thomas said, that he handled everything now, and I realized that was exactly the problem. He handled everything, including my daughter. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing his voice in my head, repeating the same words. Don't worry, Maggie. People say that when they've already made a decision and just don't want to deal with your reaction. It's not comfort, it's dismissal. I understood that now. The next morning, I took out my notebook again. I started writing everything down. The date they came, what was said, what I felt. I didn't know why I was doing it, but it made me feel less invisible. I guess part of me wanted a record of the truth, something to hold on to if I started doubting myself. It's strange how when people start ignoring you, you begin to wonder if you imagine things. Writing helped me remember that I hadn't. The days after that dinner were quiet again, but the quiet felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore, it was heavy. I began noticing little things, how Anna's texts were shorter, how Thomas spoke to me like a tenant, not family. Every time I tried to remind myself that they loved me, another part of me whispered that maybe they didn't anymore, not in the way they used to. I didn't say anything to them. I didn't ask for explanations. I've learned that when people want you gone, they don't push you all at once. They just move you, inch by inch, until one day you look around and realize there's no place left for you. That dinner was the beginning of that feeling. It was quiet, polite, uneventful, and yet it changed everything. A few weeks after that dinner, I heard a knock on the door. It was around mid-morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a man stood there holding a clipboard and a camera. He looked professional, clean-cut, polite. He smiled and said, "Mrs. Green, I'm here to photograph the property for the listing." For a second, I thought I misheard him. I said, "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong address." He looked at the papers in his hand, then read them out loud. Thomas Green, property owner. He glanced up at me and hesitated, realizing something wasn't right. My stomach turned cold. I could see the name written clearly on the document, Thomas Green. I told him, "This is my house. There must be some mistake." He apologized quickly, said he'd double-check with the office, and left. I stood there for a while, holding the door open, not really breathing. It felt like the air around me had stopped moving. The moment he left, I called Anna. The phone rang and rang, but she didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I tried texting her. No reply. A few minutes later, Thomas sent a message. "Just paperwork, Maggie. Don't stress. I'll explain later." I stared at that text for a long time. The words were simple, but they didn't comfort me. They felt like a wall. Something meant to keep me quiet. I typed back, "Is the house being listed for sale?" He didn't respond. I walked around the house after that, looking at everything like it was the first time I was seeing it. Every room was still exactly the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls hadn't moved, the furniture hadn't changed, but something inside me had. It's hard to explain that feeling, when the things you love are still there, but the meaning behind them is gone. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one I'd been using for years, and tried to make sense of it. Maybe it really was a mistake. Maybe Thomas was right and it was just paperwork. But a part of me, a quiet part I didn't want to hear, kept saying no. That voice said I'd given up something important the moment I signed those papers. By evening, I called Anna again. Still no answer. I left a voicemail trying to sound calm. I said, "Honey, someone came to the house today to take pictures. They said the property's under Thomas's name. I just want to understand what's going on." My voice cracked near the end. I don't think I noticed it until after I hung up. I made tea, sat by the table again, and waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that makes you listen to your own heartbeat. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that man with the camera. The way he said property listing so casually, like it was nothing. I imagined my home, my husband's work, our years together, reduced to photos in an online listing somewhere. A house on a screen, a price tag. That image wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning, I got up early and checked my phone again. Still no message from Anna, but Thomas had replied. He wrote, "Everything's under control. It's just part of the loan process. Don't worry yourself with this stuff." That was the second time he told me not to worry, and just like before, it didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like an order. I realized I was being kept out of something, and not by accident. They didn't forget to tell me. They chose not to. And once you understand that, once you see it clearly, something in you changes forever. Later that day, I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. I looked at the framed photos on the wall, our wedding, Anna's graduation, her first job. I wondered if she remembered any of those days the way I did, or if all of it had just become clutter to her, things that didn't fit into the new life she was building. I thought about calling her again, but I didn't. There's only so many times a person can reach out before it starts to feel like begging. So instead, I picked up my notebook and added another line. Thursday, real estate man came. Said house listed under Thomas Green. No response from Anna. I underlined Thomas's name 3 times. That night, as I sat in bed, I finally said it out loud. Not to anyone, just to myself. They're selling it. Hearing the words made my chest tighten, but it also gave me clarity. I knew now that whatever was happening wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. That was the night I stopped trusting them. When the workers showed up at my door, I didn't understand what was happening. They carried toolboxes, paint cans, and ladders. One of them asked where the electrical panel was. I told him he must have the wrong house, but then Thomas stepped out from behind them. He smiled like it was all under control and said, "We're starting the remodeling today, Maggie. It's going to look great when it's done." I looked at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. He walked past me, clapping his hands, pointing around, giving orders. "This wall here, take it down. Open up this space. We'll repaint the kitchen." I stood there, still holding the dish towel I had in my hands from cleaning the counter. I asked, "What do you mean by remodeling? I didn't agree to any remodeling." He said, "Oh, it's just temporary work, nothing big. We just need to make a few upgrades before we list the property again." That word, list, hit me hard, but before I could respond, Anna came in behind him. She looked nervous, her voice shaking a little when she said, "Mom, Thomas thinks it's best if you stay in the back room for a while, just until the work is done. It's only a few weeks." I asked, "You mean the storage shed?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It's just temporary, Mom. It's only while the workers are here. You'll be more comfortable there than dealing with all the noise and dust." I looked at her for a long moment. She wouldn't look back. I could tell she didn't believe what she was saying, but she said it anyway. That's what guilt sounds like when people pretend it's kindness. I didn't argue. I didn't want to cry in front of them. So I nodded, went to my room, and started packing a few things. Clothes, a pillow, a blanket, my notebook. I didn't take much. I told myself it really would be temporary. The workers were already hammering by the time I stepped outside. They had covered the furniture with plastic sheets. The noise filled the whole house. As I walked down the path to the small shed behind the yard, I turned back and saw my wedding photo hanging crooked on the wall. For a moment, I thought about fixing it, but then I heard a loud crash inside and decided not to go back. The shed was small, cold, and smelled like dust and old paint. It used to hold my husband's tools. There was no bed, just a fold-out chair and a thin blanket. I sat down and listened to the sound of the hammering echo through the walls. I could hear laughter, too. Young voices talking about measurements and paint colors, like they were planning something exciting. I wrapped the blanket around myself and tried to rest. I could see the light from the house through the small window, just a soft glow in the distance. That used to be my light. Now it looked like it belonged to someone else. Later that night, Anna came out with a tray of food. She looked tired and guilty. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom. It's only temporary. You know Thomas. He likes to get things done quickly." I told her it was fine, that I understood, but when she left, I sat there staring at the door for a long time. I wanted to call her back, to tell her how much it hurt, but I didn't. Sometimes silence is the only thing that keeps you from breaking apart completely. The next morning, I tried to go into the house to make coffee. One of the workers stopped me and said they were redoing the floors, that it wasn't safe. He said Thomas told them I'd be staying out back for now. I just nodded and went back to the shed. I waited there, listening to the sound of my own home being torn apart. Every hammer strike felt like a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. I could picture them moving furniture, painting over the walls that still had nail holes from old family photos. I wondered if they'd paint over the marks where Anna had measured her height when she was a little girl. Maybe they already had. Days passed like that. No one told me when it would be finished. No one came to check if I needed anything. I spent most of my time writing in my notebook, listing what was happening day by day, the way you might record the weather. Monday, construction began. Tuesday, told to stay outside. Wednesday, no updates. The more I wrote, the more it felt like I was documenting the slow erasing of my life. Sometimes at night I could hear Anna and Thomas inside, talking and laughing. Their voices were faint through the walls, but I could still recognize them. I wondered if they ever mentioned me, if they ever stopped to think about where I was sleeping. I doubted it. One night there was a sound like glass breaking. I froze. I didn't know what it was until I looked through the small window and saw my wedding photo lying on the floor inside. The frame was broken. I thought about going in to pick it up, but I didn't. I just sat there watching it from afar, feeling like something sacred had been stepped on. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept thinking about how easily everything can be taken away. You spend a lifetime building a home, loving people, trusting them. Then one day, they tell you to move out to a shed, and they call it temporary. They use words like practical and efficient, but what they really mean is, we've outgrown you. Every morning after that, I watched the house from my window. The light in the kitchen stayed on late into the night. It used to make me feel safe, but now it just made me feel small, like I was watching someone else's life from a distance. I realized then that exile doesn't always mean leaving your home. Sometimes it means staying close enough to see what you've lost, but far enough to know you'll never get it back. Anna came out once more before they left for the weekend. She said they'd be finishing things soon, that I'd be able to move back in. She said it like she believed it, but I could see the doubt in her face. I just smiled and said, "That's good, honey." She hugged me, but it was quick, the kind of hug that ends before it starts. When she walked back toward the house, I watched her disappear behind the door that used to be mine. The wind was cold, and I thought about how quiet the world gets when no one calls your name anymore. That night, I wrote one last line in my notebook before turning off the lamp. They said it was temporary, but some kinds of exile never end. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking past the living room when I heard Thomas talking on the phone. His voice was low, confident, the kind of voice people use when they think no one's listening. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something about his tone made me stop. He said, "Once the title clears, I'll transfer it to my shell company. It'll be cleaner that way." I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The words didn't even make sense at first. Title, transfer, shell company. But deep down, I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about my house, about the only thing left that still belonged to me. He hung up a few seconds later and walked into the kitchen, still looking at his phone. He didn't see me standing there. I waited until he went outside before I let myself sit down. My legs felt weak. I kept hearing those words over and over again like a drum beat. Once the title clears. That night, after they left, I went through the small drawer in the hallway where I keep old papers. There were bills, letters, and a folder with my name written in Ben's handwriting. Inside were all the old house documents, including the title from years ago. I found my husband's signature on the bottom, dated 1992. He had written both our names side by side, Bean and Margaret Lowell. Seeing that made my throat tighten. I traced his handwriting with my finger, almost afraid the ink would fade if I touched it too long. Then I looked for the newer papers Thomas had given me months earlier, the ones I'd signed without reading carefully. They weren't where I'd left them. I searched every drawer, every folder. Finally, I found them in a file Thomas had kept in the office cabinet. When I unfolded the first page, my name wasn't there. Just his. Thomas Green, property owner. I read the line twice to make sure I wasn't seeing it wrong. I checked every page, every signature. My handwriting was nowhere on it. It was as if I'd never existed in those papers. My heart pounded so hard it made my hands shake. I went to the kitchen table and laid both sets of documents side by side, the old one with my husband's name, the new one with Thomas's. I compared them for hours, line by line, trying to understand what had changed. But what struck me most wasn't the missing name. It was how quiet the house felt while I was doing it. The kind of quiet that lets fear settle deep in your chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there for a long time, staring at my husband's signature and thinking about how much trust can destroy a person when it's given to the wrong hands. I kept hearing Thomas's voice again, that calm, casual tone, talking about clean transfers and shell companies. He made it sound like numbers on paper, but for me, it was 30 years of my life. It was my marriage, my family, my home. When I realized what he had done, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't sadness this time. It wasn't even fear. It was anger, quiet, heavy, deliberate. The kind of anger that doesn't shout. It just waits. I opened my notebook, the same one I'd been writing in for months. I wrote everything down. The date, the words I overheard, what I saw in the papers. My handwriting was shaky at first, but it steadied as I wrote. Then, at the bottom of the page, I wrote one sentence. They think silence is ignorance, but silence is just preparation. After that, I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a while. I thought about Ben, about what he would have said if he were still here. He was always the calm one, the one who thought before speaking. I could almost hear his voice telling me, "Write it all down, Maggie. The truth always needs a record." So I kept writing. Every day after that, I made notes of what I saw, what they said, what they didn't. I kept copies of every bill, every message. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with them, but I knew I needed proof. I'd been quiet for too long, letting them decide what was best for me. But now I knew better. The next time Thomas came by, I didn't ask questions. I didn't mention what I'd heard. I greeted him politely, the same as always. He probably thought I was still the same quiet woman who smiled and stayed out of the way. He didn't notice how closely I watched him, how I started listening differently. Every word he said was another piece of a puzzle I hadn't seen before. That night, I realized something else. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing trust. And once that's gone, there's no going back. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. The anger inside me wasn't loud, but it was steady. It was the first time I felt strength in it, not shame. For months, I'd been shrinking, apologizing, accepting. But that night, sitting with those papers spread out in front of me, I felt something new. Clarity. I knew what they were doing now, and for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to let it continue. It had been weeks since I'd spoken to anyone besides Anna or Thomas. I'd stopped calling neighbors, stopped going to the market except when I really had to. I didn't have the energy to explain what was happening, and I wasn't sure anyone would understand. Most days, I just kept to myself, wrote in my notebook and waited for something to change, though I didn't know what. Then one afternoon there was a knock on the door of the shed. I opened it, and standing there was Helen Moore, my old friend from the school district where we both worked before retirement. She used to be the secretary for the district's legal office, sharp as ever even now, with the kind of calm voice that made you feel safe. She looked at me for a second, then said, "Maggie, you look tired." I wanted to say I was fine, but the truth must have shown on my face. We sat together on the small bench just outside. I poured her some tea I'd made earlier. For a while, we didn't talk. She just looked around the yard at the tools scattered near the fence and then quietly asked, "What happened here?" At first, I didn't want to tell her. I was embarrassed. It's hard to explain how your own family could do something like this to you, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about the papers, about the man who came to photograph the house, about how Thomas said it was just paperwork. I told her how my name was gone from the documents and how I'd been living out here in the shed while they remodeled. I told her everything, even the parts that made me sound naive. Helen didn't interrupt, she just listened. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Maggie, when you stop speaking, you stop existing in their world." I didn't answer right away. Her words stayed in the air between us, heavy but true. She looked at me again and said, "You've been quiet too long. People like Thomas count on that. They think silence means they've already won." I looked down at my hands. They were rough from years of work, but I could feel them trembling. "What can I even do now?" I asked. "The house isn't in my name anymore. They've already taken it." Helen leaned forward. "Maybe not completely. I know someone who helps women in situations like this. Her name's Grace Lyman. She's a property lawyer. Smart, fair, doesn't back down easily. You should talk to her." I didn't say anything for a while. The idea of seeing a lawyer made me nervous. I'd never dealt with courts or legal papers. My whole life had been about trusting people and keeping peace. Helen must have seen the hesitation on my face because she said, "Grace isn't like the others. She helps women who've been pushed aside, women whose families tried to take what was theirs. "You're not the first, Maggie." That last sentence hit me. You're not the first. Somehow that made me feel less alone. Helen offered to call Grace for me. She said, "Cho, just talk to her. You don't have to commit to anything." I agreed. It felt strange to say yes to something after so many months of saying nothing at all. 2 days later, I met Grace. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her 40s, with a calm, clear way of speaking. She didn't rush me. She let me tell my story from the beginning. When I finished, she nodded and said, "If you can find the original blueprint or property design signed by your husband, they can't legally transfer the ownership without your consent. It's your proof of joint ownership. That signature binds the title." For the first time in months, I felt my heart lift. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was direction. I asked her what I needed to do, and she said, "Start by finding the old records, anything with his name and the date. We'll go from there." After she left, I walked back to the old woodworking shed behind the yard. It had been years since I'd gone through my husband's tools. Dust covered everything. The shelves were stacked with boxes, old nails, scraps of wood, bits of projects he never finished. I opened one box and found his handwriting on the side. Boat frame, 1991. Inside was a folder with some sketches and receipts. My hands were shaking as I turned through them. The smell of the old paper, the handwriting. It felt like he was still there somehow. I found invoices, tax slips, and finally, tucked between two faded notebooks, a rolled-up blueprint. I unrolled it slowly, and there it was, the original design of our house, signed in his handwriting. The ink was faint but still readable. Benjamin Lowell, 1992. For a moment, I just stared at it. My throat felt tight, and I had to sit down. All those months of helplessness, of being ignored and dismissed, suddenly had somewhere to go. I took a deep breath and said out loud, "You didn't build this house for them, Ben. You built it for us." That night, I wrote in my notebook again. The last line I wrote was, "They think silence is weakness, but silence is where strength begins." Then I added another, smaller note underneath it, something Helen had reminded me of. "When you start speaking again, they have to see you." I looked around the shed before turning off the light. The place was still dusty, cluttered, full of things I hadn't touched in years. But that night, it didn't feel like a storage room anymore. It felt like the beginning of something. Maybe not a victory, but a fight, one I was finally ready for. After talking to Grace, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. "If you can find the original plans, Maggie, the ones signed by your husband, that will change everything." Her words kept circling in my mind for days. I didn't know where to start looking. Most of Ben's things had been untouched for years, sitting in the old workshop behind the house. I used to avoid going in there. It was too full of memories and I wasn't ready to face them. But now I had a reason, maybe even a chance, to finally open that door again. The next morning I took a deep breath and went to the shed. The door creaked when I pushed it open. It smelled like sawdust and old varnish, just the way it always had when Ben was alive. Everything was still in its place. The workbench, the shelves filled with boxes, jars of screws, bits of unfinished woodwork. It looked frozen in time, as if he had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. I started opening drawers, one by one. Some were filled with nails and tools, others with old receipts, pieces of sandpaper, scraps of wood with half-carved designs. I wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for. Maybe a folder, a rolled-up plan, anything that had his handwriting. Hours passed, and I began to feel frustrated. My hands were covered in dust, and my back ached from bending over so long. I was about to stop when I noticed a narrow wooden chest tucked under the bench. It was small, something Ben used to keep personal things in. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside were a few photos, a broken measuring tape, and a stack of folded papers. I recognized his handwriting right away. My hands trembled as I unfolded the top sheet. It was the original design of our home, yellowed with age but still clear. At the bottom, in Ben's writing, it said, "Built for Maggie. May this home always lead her back." I stared at those words for a long time. I hadn't realized I was crying until the paper blurred in front of me. That sentence, simple, quiet, felt like Ben was still speaking to me, reminding me of what we built together. It wasn't just a house, it was our promise. I sat there holding the paper against my chest. All those months of silence, all the humiliation, the fear of losing everything, suddenly they didn't feel so heavy, because now, for the first time, I had something real. Not just memories, proof. As I wiped my eyes, I heard someone call from outside. "Hello, Mrs. Lowell?" I turned and saw a young man standing at the door. He wore a tool belt and had a gentle face that looked vaguely familiar. I realized he was one of the workers Thomas had hired for the remodeling. He looked surprised to see me there and said, "You're Mrs. Lowell, right? I didn't know anyone was out here." I nodded, trying to pull myself together. He stepped closer and smiled. "My dad always talked about you. He said he learned carpentry from you back when you volunteered at the trade school." That took me by surprise. "Your dad's name?" I asked. "Jim Carter," he said. "He passed away a few years ago, but he always told me, if you ever meet Mrs. Lowell, you tell her she taught me the value of good hands." I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone remembered me for something good. I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. I said, "Your father was one of the best students I ever had." He grinned and said, "I'm trying to live up to that." He noticed the papers on the table and asked, "Are those the old plans for the house?" I hesitated, not sure if I should tell him, but something in his tone made me trust him. I said, "Yes. My husband drew them himself. I'm trying to make a copy for legal reasons, but I don't have a scanner." Sam, that was his name, nodded right away. "I can help with that. I've got a portable scanner in my truck. I use it for measurements and blueprints. I'll send it to you and whoever you need to forward it to." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. I told him that would mean the world to me. He went to his truck and came back with a small scanner and laptop. I watched as he carefully flattened the old paper, treating it with more care than anyone had shown me in months. The light on the scanner moved slowly across the sheet, and I could see Ben's signature appear on the screen, clear and bold even after all these years. When he finished, Sam said softly, "It's a beautiful design. They don't make homes like this anymore." I nodded, and my voice cracked a little as I said, "No, they don't." He sent the file to Grace's email right there, double-checking that it went through. When the confirmation appeared, he smiled. "All done, Mrs. Lowell. You've got it saved now." I thanked him probably too many times. Before he left, he said, "Don't let anyone take this from you. My dad used to say you built with heart, and things built with heart don't break easy." I stood at the door watching him walk away, feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. When he was gone, I sat back down at the workbench, looking at the space that had once been my husband's. The dust didn't bother me anymore. It didn't feel like a grave of memories. It felt like a place reborn. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Today I found proof. For the first time, my past isn't just a memory. It's evidence. Then I added one more line. And maybe, after all this time, Ben's light finally found its way back to me. After that day in the workshop, Sam came by a few more times to help with small things. He said Thomas had asked him to finish some work on the porch and check the plumbing. I didn't mind. He was polite, soft-spoken, and didn't treat me like I was invisible. Most people around Thomas acted like they were working for a man in charge of everything. Sam wasn't like that. He worked quietly, carefully, like he respected the space he was in. One afternoon, while he was fixing a pipe under the sink, he said something that made me stop what I was doing. He said, "Mrs. Lowell, I think you should know something. I'm not trying to cause trouble, but Thomas has been talking to someone about a company called Mariner Holdings." I asked him what that meant, and he looked uneasy, like he wasn't sure how much to say. Then he added, "From what I heard, he plans to move the property title under that company's name once the transfer finishes. My boss mentioned it by accident, not realizing I knew you lived here." For a few seconds, I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. The name sounded harmless, Mariner Holdings. But I'd learned enough from Grace to know what it meant. It was a shell company, a cover. Once the title was moved there, it would disappear from anything that tied it back to me. I took a deep breath and said, "Are you sure, Sam?" He nodded slowly. "I saw one of the emails. Thomas sent it to the project manager last week." I could tell he felt bad even saying it. "I can try to get a copy for you. You didn't hear that from me, but I think you deserve to know what's being done with your home." I wanted to tell him not to get involved, that it wasn't his responsibility, but I also knew that without help, I wouldn't have a chance. So instead I said, "If you can find that email, just send it to this address." I gave him Grace's contact on a small note. He nodded, pocketed it, and promised to handle it carefully. That night I couldn't sleep again. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps. Every car passing by made me think of someone coming to take what was left of my life, but mixed with the fear was something else, a strange kind of hope. It wasn't that I believed everything would suddenly be fine, but for the first time, someone other than Grace believed me. Someone younger, someone who didn't owe me anything, was willing to help just because it was the right thing to do. The next day, Sam came by after work. He looked tired, nervous even, but determined. He showed me his phone and said quietly, "I forwarded Grace a copy of the email thread. It has the file about the property transfer. Thomas was talking about finalizing it by next week." I didn't even know what to say. I just whispered, "Thank you." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. My dad always said you taught him that carpentry wasn't just about building things. It was about doing the job, right? He said you cared about people, not just the wood. He said, that's why her work lasts." Those words hit me harder than I expected. It had been a long time since anyone remembered me that way. Not as a burden, not as a problem, but as someone who had once done something good. I smiled and said, "Your father was a good man. He always did his best work." Sam smiled back and said, "He told me you built things that lasted. That's why I'm helping you. Because he said you made things that were meant to stay standing." I didn't answer right away. I felt my throat tighten. It had been so long since kindness found its way into this house that I almost forgot what it sounded like. I realized then that decency didn't disappear with age or greed. It just needed someone willing to keep it alive. Later that evening, Grace called. She had received the email and confirmed what we suspected. The plan was to transfer the property into Mariner Holdings by the end of the week. She said the documents Sam sent would be enough to request an injunction to stop the transfer before it became official. Her voice was calm but urgent. "We have proof now, Maggie. This changes everything." After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the small shed, holding Ben's old blueprint in my hands. The sound of the ocean carried faintly through the open window. For months, I had felt like I was fading, like the world had decided I didn't exist anymore. But now, piece by piece, things were coming back into focus: my name, my history, my worth. When Sam stopped by the next day, I told him about Grace's call. He looked relieved. "That's good news," he said. "You deserve to win this." I told him it wasn't just about winning. It's about remembering that what's right still matters. He nodded, and before he left, he said something that stayed with me. "Maybe the things you built weren't just made of wood, Mrs. Lowell. Maybe you built people too." After he drove away, I sat on the porch, looking at the light still glowing from the house. For the first time, it didn't hurt to see it. I thought about Ben, about Helen, about Grace, and now about Sam. All the people who still carried some piece of goodness in them. I realized that maybe what we build in others is what truly lasts. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Today, I found proof that kindness still exists. It doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to keep the fire going. I knew something had changed the moment Thomas stopped pretending to be polite. He came by the shed one afternoon, his face tight, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. He didn't even knock. He said, "You've been talking to people you shouldn't. There's been a leak." I didn't answer. He didn't need one. He already knew. His eyes were full of anger, but beneath that I could see fear, the kind people feel when they start losing control. He told me I wasn't allowed in the house anymore, said it was for my own safety, that the workers didn't want me around while they were finishing up. I knew it was a lie. It wasn't about safety. It was punishment. He was closing every door I still had left. When he walked away, I called out for Anna. She stood near the porch, frozen, her hands wrapped around her phone. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. I waited for her to speak, to defend me, to say even one word that sounded like love. But she didn't. She just turned and went back inside. The door closed softly, but the silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. That night, the wind started picking up. The storm came fast, the kind that shakes the whole coastline. The shed rattled under the gusts, and rain hit the roof like a drum. I sat in the dark with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the sound of the ocean crashing somewhere beyond the yard. Through the small window, I could still see the porch light. It flickered in the wind, sometimes dimming, sometimes flaring back to life. I stared at it for a long time. That light had always meant something to me. It was the last piece of warmth left between me and the world I used to know. Ben used to say, "As long as that light burns, we'll always find our way home." Now, I wasn't sure if it was still burning for me or for someone else. I thought about everything that had happened, the signatures, the lies, the way Anna avoided my eyes, The way Thomas spoke to me like I was in the way. It was all building toward this, wasn't it? The storm outside felt like a mirror of everything I'd been holding in. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to make them see what they had done. But instead I sat there quietly and let the wind do the shouting for me. At one point, the light on the porch flickered again. For a moment, it looked like it might go out completely. I whispered to myself, as long as that light still burns, so do I. The words came out steady, almost like a vow. Maybe I said it to convince myself. Maybe I said it because it was true. The storm raged through the night. Water leaked through the cracks in the roof. The shed smelled like wet wood and old dust. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. Every sound around me felt alive. The creak of the wood, the whistling wind, the thunder in the distance. But underneath it all, there was something else. A strange calm. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I was alone, yes, but not defeated. Grace had the documents. Sam had sent the proof. Helen was still checking in. And I had the blueprint, Ben's handwriting, his signature, his message to me. That was my anchor. They could lock the doors, they could change the names on the papers, but they couldn't erase what built this place. When the storm reached its loudest, I stood up and went to the window. The porch light was still there, shaking but steady. I watched it and thought about how many nights it had burned through worse weather. I realized that maybe that was what this moment was for. To strip everything away until all that was left was what truly mattered. When the thunder finally began to fade, I sat down again and opened my notebook. My hands were cold, but the words came easily this time. They can keep me out of the house, but they can't keep me out of the truth. I paused, then added one more line. The storm doesn't scare me anymore. It sounds like change. I closed the notebook and set it beside me. The light outside flickered once more, and I smiled. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't steady, but it was still burning. And as long as it did, so would I. The courthouse smelled like old paper and rain. It was a small, plain building in town, not grand, not intimidating, just quiet in that way that makes every sound feel louder. Grace and I sat together on the wooden bench near the front. My hands were cold even though it wasn't that chilly inside. I kept them folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. Thomas sat a few seats away with his lawyer. He looked calm, even smug. He was dressed neatly, the same polished look he always had, tapping his fingers on the table like this was just another business meeting. Anna sat beside him. She didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and her hands twisted the strap of her purse. I tried not to look at her too much. I didn't want her to see the mix of love and disappointment in my face. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of the gavel was sharp, final. Grace leaned closer to me and whispered, "Just breathe, Maggie. We have everything we need." I nodded. The session began. Thomas's lawyer spoke first, using words that sounded polished and distant. Property transfer, administrative process, verbal consent. He kept his tone calm, as if everything was routine, just a misunderstanding that would soon be cleared up. I watched Thomas nod along, confident. When it was Grace's turn, she stood up slowly and walked to the center. Her voice was steady, not loud, but every word carried weight. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here because my client's home, her late husband's home, was transferred without her knowledge or written consent. We have documentation to prove her joint ownership, and evidence that this transfer violated the terms of that ownership." She opened her folder and took out the rolled blueprint Sam had scanned, the original plans Ben had drawn 30 years ago. The paper had been cleaned and flattened, but the signature was still clear. Grace held it up and said, "This document predates every transaction Mr. Green initiated. It contains the original title and ownership notes, signed by Benjamin and Margaret Lowell, dated 1992. This is not just a memory, Your Honor. It's a legal record." I watched Thomas's face change. The confidence faded. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering quickly. The lawyer asked for a moment to review the document. The judge allowed it. Grace stood calmly waiting. When they finished whispering, Grace asked the first question. "Mr. Green, did Mrs. Lowell ever sign a consent form allowing you to transfer ownership of the property into your name?" Thomas hesitated, then said, "It was verbal consent." She agreed. It was a family arrangement. Grace didn't flinch. She looked straight at him. "So you have no written consent, no witness signatures, and no documentation, just your word?" He nodded stiffly. "Then your voice is your only evidence, Mr. Green," Grace said softly. The room went still. The judge took a Sawawa moment flipping through the files. He asked me to step forward. My knees felt weak, but I stood. Grace gave me a small nod. The judge asked, "Mrs. Lowell, did you ever give Mr. Green verbal or written consent to transfer this property?" I looked at Thomas, then at Anna. I said, "No, Your Honor, I trusted him. He asked me to sign something he said was temporary on a business form. I never agreed to give up my home." The judge nodded. Grace approached me gently. "Mrs. Lowell," she said, "can you tell the court what this house means to you?" My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "It's not just a house. It's where my husband and I built our life. We built it with our hands. Every wall, every floorboard carries his name and mine. I don't need this house to live. I need justice to breathe." You could feel the air shift in the room. Even the judge paused for a moment before writing something down. Anna covered her face with her hands. Thomas sat completely still. Grace turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The property was transferred under false pretenses, without legal consent, and in violation of the original deed. We request that ownership be restored to the Lowell estate immediately." The judge reviewed the documents again, then looked up. His voice was even but firm. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The property shall be restored to the original estate of Benjamin and Margaret Lowell. All subsequent transfers are void." For a moment I couldn't move. I heard the words, but it took a few seconds for them to sink in. Grace squeezed my hand. "It's over," she whispered. Thomas stared straight ahead, silent. His lawyer began packing the files quickly, avoiding my eyes. Anna looked at me, tears filling her eyes. I didn't feel triumph, just an ache that was finally easing. When we stepped outside, the sky was clear again. The storm had passed overnight, leaving everything washed clean. Grace put her arm around my shoulders. "You did it, Maggie," she said. I shook my head. "No, we did." Anna walked toward me then. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "I know. Just remember what this place means. It wasn't built for greed, it was built for family." She nodded, tears running down her face. Thomas stayed behind, talking on his phone, already trying to fix what couldn't be undone. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, just free. The air felt clearer. For months, I'd carried the weight of being silent, being dismissed, being forgotten. But now, for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. That night, I returned to the house. It still smelled of sawdust and paint, but it was quiet. I turned on the porch light, the same light that had always been there, and sat for a long time just watching it glow. It didn't shine for ghosts anymore. It shone for the living. The week after the hearing passed in a blur, Grace stopped by with paperwork, Helen brought flowers, and Sam fixed the broken step on the porch before heading out of town for a new job. Everyone said congratulations, but I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones after you've held your breath for too long. One morning, while I was making tea, the room tilted. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I remember the sound, sharp, far away, and then nothing. When I woke up, everything was white. The ceiling, the sheets, the curtains, all pale and still. The faint beeping of a monitor pulsed in the background. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw Anna sitting beside the bed, her hands clasped together, eyes red from crying. She noticed I was awake and leaned closer. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You scared me." I tried to smile, but my face felt heavy. She took my hand and said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing. For not standing up when you needed me to." I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't see the distance in her eyes. I saw my daughter again, the same girl who used to sit by the window, listening to the ocean, dreaming out loud. I managed to whisper, "It's okay." My voice was barely there, but I meant it. The light was always meant to guide you home. She cried quietly, resting her head on my hand. I could feel the warmth of her tears against my skin. The hospital room was silent except for the hum of machines and the soft sound of her breathing. I thought of Ben then, of his handwriting on the blueprint, of his words. "Built for Maggie, may this home always lead her back." For so long, I thought the light on the porch was for him. But lying there, watching Anna beside me, I realized it had always been for her too. It wasn't just a symbol of memory, it was a promise. That no matter how far we drift, love can still find its way back through the cracks. The doctor came in and said I'd had a mild stroke, nothing too serious. He told Anna I needed rest, that I'd be fine with time. She nodded, but I could see the guilt still weighing on her. I squeezed her hand weakly and whispered, "We'll go home soon." Later, when she stepped out to make a call, I looked toward the window. The sunlight slipped through the curtains in thin, golden lines. It reminded me of the light from the porch, softer now, but still burning. I smiled. After everything, the betrayal, the silence, the storm, I finally understood that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of forgiving, of choosing to stay kind even when the world hasn't been. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. For the first time in years, I felt still, not defeated, not angry, just alive. The house was safe, the truth was known, and my daughter was beside me again. That was enough. It took a few months before my hands were strong enough to hold the tools again. The doctor said I needed a rest, but I knew better. Work had always been my kind of healing. The first time I touched a piece of wood after leaving the hospital, I could almost feel Ben's presence beside me, the way he used to lean over my shoulder, smiling, telling me to measure twice, cut once. Grace helped me settle the legal paperwork, and Helen visited every week with groceries and stories about her grandchildren. The house felt lighter now, cleaner somehow. I opened the windows every morning and let the air flow through the rooms again. The porch light stayed on every night, not as a symbol of loss anymore, but as a quiet reminder of survival. One afternoon, Sam stopped by. He had the same calm smile and a truck full of tools. "I've been thinking," he said, "you and I should start something. A small workshop, make things the way they used to be made. Honest work, real hands." I laughed. "You mean you want to build a business with an old lady?" He grinned. "I mean, I want to build with the best teacher I've ever had." So we did. We rented an old space near the harbor, nothing fancy, a converted boathouse with cracked windows and the smell of salt in the walls. We called it Lowell Craft Studio. The first day, I stood in the doorway, looking at the empty benches and the sunlight cutting through the dust. It felt like a beginning, not a continuation. Like I'd been given a second life, carved from the wreckage of the first. Sam handled the machines and heavy work. I focused on design, sketches, finishes, little details that made each piece feel personal. We made chairs, tables, toy chests, things built to last, things meant to hold memory. Sometimes people would come in and ask about the name carved above the door. I'd smile and say, "It's for the people who build with love." The days fell into a rhythm. The sound of saws, the smell of fresh wood, the hum of small conversations. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I could still create. Every nail, every line of grain, every curve of a chair felt like a small act of faith, proof that life could be rebuilt, quietly and honestly. One morning, Anna came by. I hadn't seen her much since the hearing. She walked in slowly, holding a baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. Her eyes were gentler now. I could see she'd been trying to understand, trying to heal. "Mom," she said softly, "this is Ella." She placed the baby in my arms. I looked down at her tiny face, her fingers curling like little roots reaching for the world. My heart swelled in a way I hadn't felt in years. Anna smiled, a little unsure of herself. "I wanted her to see this place," she said. "I wanted her to know where she comes from, and I wanted her to know that silence doesn't mean kindness. It means you forgot to protect yourself." I looked at her, really looked. There was strength in her now, something I hadn't seen before. I smiled and said, "Then teach her that building with love doesn't mean letting people take it away. It means knowing what's worth keeping." She nodded, and for a moment everything felt whole again. We spent the rest of the afternoon together. Sam showed her around the studio, explaining how each tool worked. The baby slept in my arms while I watched them. The light through the window caught the dust in the air, turning it golden. It was the same kind of light that used to fill my old workshop with Ben. For a moment it felt like time had folded, past and present, pain and peace, all in one breath. Before she left, Anna looked at the carved words above the door, "For those who build with love." She traced the letters with her finger and said quietly, "Dad would have liked that." I smiled. He would have loved it. After they drove away, I stood in the doorway again. The harbor breeze carried the sound of seagulls, the smell of salt, the soft hum of the town. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness. Just a quiet understanding that some things fall apart so better ones can be built in their place. That night, I turned on the porch light again. From the window of the workshop, I could see it glowing across the distance. The same light that had once watched over loss now shone over a place of creation, and for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't just feel alive. I felt useful again. Night again. The kind of quiet night where even the ocean seems to hold its breath. I step out onto the porch, the wood cool under my feet. The air carries the faint smell of salt and cedar. For a moment, I just stand there, looking out at the water. It's been months since the hearing. The house has changed. A few new boards, new paint, a softer sound in the air. But the feeling of it, the soul of it, is still the same. Sometimes I still hear Ben's voice in the creak of the stairs, or see Anna's laughter in the corners of the kitchen. Not ghosts, just memories that never learned how to leave. I reach for the porch light and turn it on. The bulb hums softly before it glows, that familiar, steady light. I watch it flicker once, then burn strong. The same light that once felt like a memory now feels like a heartbeat. It's the same one that guided my husband home from the sea. The same one that stayed on when my daughter forgot to call. The same one that glowed through every storm, every silence, every night I thought I wouldn't make it. I sit on the old chair by the railing, notebook in my lap. The pages are almost full now. Notes, names, memories, truths. When I started writing, it was out of fear. Now I write because I want to remember. Because remembering means I'm still here. Across the yard, the workshop lights are off, but I can still smell the faint trace of sawdust. Sam will be back tomorrow to finish a table for a customer. He always says, things made by hand hold pieces of the maker. I think that's true. Maybe that's what this house is. A piece of everyone who ever loved it, stitched together by time and forgiveness. I think of Anna, too. She visits often now, always bringing the baby. Sometimes she stands in the doorway and just looks around, quietly touching the walls like she's learning to see them for the first time. I never ask what she's thinking. I don't need to. The way she looks at me now tells me she understands everything words could never fix. The wind picks up a little, soft and cool, brushing my hair from my face. The porch light sways faintly in its glass cover, casting a shimmer across the steps. The reflection stretches out toward the water, dancing over the dark surface. I watch it, thinking of how far that light travels, how it touches the waves, the air, maybe even the edge of memory. For so long, I thought keeping that light on was an act of waiting. Waiting for someone to come home, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for peace. But tonight I realize it was something else. It wasn't about waiting. It was about reminding myself that I still existed, even in the dark. I whisper more to myself than to anyone. I once dimmed myself so others could shine. I pause, feeling the wind against my cheek, the hum of the light above me. Then I smile softly and say, now, I am the light. The waves keep rolling, slow and rhythmic. The air smells like rain, though the sky is clear. Somewhere behind me, the workshop clock ticks steadily. The camera, if there were one, would start to pull back now, showing the little wooden house, the workshop, and the single porch light glowing against the night. It would drift higher until the light became just a small dot against the endless dark, but still visible, still burning. Because that's the truth of it. Some things break, but they don't end. Some lights flicker, but they don't die. The screen fades slowly to black, and for a moment before everything disappears, there's only the sound of the sea and the faint hum of that porch light. Steady, gentle, alive.